Welcome back to another episode of My BrainWise Coach. I'm Cole Bastian, one of your hosts for the show, and I'm joined by my co-host, Phil Dixon, and we are extremely excited to be bringing you another conversation related to all things neuroscience in the brain, how we can use it to decode what's happening in our life. And so before we dive in and start talking about our weeks, Phil, and our BrainWise or BrainWise unmoments for the week, I want to just talk about, some people are probably saying, if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, the 100 behind my head, it might be inverse for you, but it is 100, just FYI. It's not 001. It is 100. And we're doing that to celebrate our 100th subscriber on YouTube, and which is a huge feat. And we're so excited about it. And actually, I think as of today, we have 145 subscribers on YouTube, which really what that means is the goal and the mission of what Phil and I have set out to do from the very beginning of helping get this message to more people is beginning to expand. We're not in this to become influencers or all those things. Who knows what will happen as a part of a byproduct of this, but the real purpose and intention of us doing this is to provide people with information to be able to make different decisions in their life, or to educate ourselves, all of us as individuals, from a perspective of the brain and how we can use that information to make even better choices as we go along, or decode what might be happening. So Phil, a celebratory moment. We hit 100 subscribers on YouTube. And our measurement of success, for those who didn't know this, was we said if we could get one person, particularly on LinkedIn at the time, that we didn't know to follow us, we would be successful. Phil, we're at 145.
I think we underestimated, or we set our goal too low. But, yeah,
I think we did.
I think the next goal is to have everybody help us get to 200.
Absolutely. Or maybe even 300. It steadily is increasing. And the best way that can happen is if you're learning and enjoying the podcast, then, comment, follow, subscribe, and most importantly, share it with your network, because then they too can learn something and that might apply to them in their life.
And I'll add in something as what I was going to talk about my week, but I had two people contact me over the last 10 days or so that were in my life 15 years ago, and they heard about our podcast through one way or another and contacted and enjoying. One of them's bought the book. The other one is both of them are enjoying the podcast. So
that's awesome.
That's great to hear. It was great to hear from some old, they're not old, but they're people out of my past.
I love it. And that's really the whole point, right? Is to be able to share all of this information, connect with our BrainWise friends along the journey, and be able to talk about what neuroscience is, how it can better help people in their own life, and ultimately just have some fun as we go on this learning journey together. Phil, it's a great segue into how has your week been? And I know last week, you were able to boil an egg. There were still a couple of other things that were on its journey, but how is the kitchen? Is it totally complete now? And where are you with that journey? And of course, what else happened during your week that you want to talk about?
So we're about 95% complete with the kitchen. All the appliances are now installed. And I separate that installed from working, because the brand new refrigerator, which is a built-in refrigerator we paid a lot of money for, the refrigerator's working, but the freezer isn't. Hey, it's an operative kitchen, and we are indeed having our first guests over this evening. It's been 3.5 months in total. So since we actually moved out and they started demo. Wow. Yeah, it's been a long row.
Sounds like it.
Anyway, we are close.
You're basically there. 95% is almost 100 in my book. So you're basically there. And I have to know, what are you cooking for dinner tonight and with your first guests?
We are having what's called a raclette. I don't know whether you've ever had a raclette, but basically what it is, you take small potatoes and you parboil them, or you actually boil them. And then you have a raclette oven that's got a hot flat stone, and you put cheese on little scoops underneath it till the cheese melts, and you pour the cheese over the potatoes, and then you put some savory along with it, olives or gherkins or things like that. And it's a help yourself fun event It's called a raclette, RACLETTE. And it's a very jovial, everyone helps themselves at their own speed and nobody is stuck cooking. So
Right.
we invited the guests over, but they'll have to do their own cooking.
That's all right. We get to enjoy its potato version of a charcuterie board.
It's a potato version. It's a cross between a charcuterie board and what we used to cheese fondue. So yeah, it's always a fun event. And who knows, we may play Cards Against Humanity afterwards.
Oh, I love it. That will get a little wild.
It always does.
My week has been a really good week. Over the weekend, we had some fun and we went to a family reunion and had a really good time seeing my husband's family, and which of course is now my family, but spending time with them and bringing people together that hadn't seen each other in probably, I think it was 7 years or longer. Some people didn't even know they were related. And my immediate family before I got married was rather small. It's pretty small. And so being in a room with probably close to 80 people, which isn't even all of them that are related through one person, I just thought was just such a fun experience and something I'd never been a part of. So that got things started off right. And the week overall, I think, was fairly positive. Working on the book itself, is the narrative book is done now. I'm working on the accompanying field guide and moving along that journey. Still in transition. I know our BrainWise friends have been listening for a while and haven't decided exactly where I'm going next after I am finished helping my current organization navigate their restructuring plan. But all things considered, it's a really good week. And I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today, because I think it plays into a lot of different places that we can have some conversation around. Before we dive into that, let's talk about our brain wise or our brain unwise moments for the week. And if you don't mind, Phil, I'm going to kick us off, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Okay, perfect. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You see the 100 behind me. This is not because I typically, and maybe it's a part of my worldview and how I grew up, I am bad about celebrating my personal milestones. I definitely wanted to and always try to celebrate other people's milestones and the accomplishments that they have. A mental model I have is I have to be the best, which I've shared before, and now I've reframed it to be my best is good enough. But sometimes I still forget. And so I want to say thank you to my husband, Joey, because he is very good about celebrating the small milestones or big milestones in our life. And he, on, I think it was Wednesday or Tuesday, maybe, he went and bought these balloons, filled them up, and had it waiting for me when I came downstairs after doing some things upstairs. And it was just such a really cute and heartwarming and celebratory moment for me, because it was, one, it was a pick me up. I needed it this week. And then two, it reminded me that a brain-wise moment for all of us is you're always trying to get to a goal of the end destination of whatever it is that you've defined for yourself, which is oftentimes what I do. But then not realizing that there's so much joy that can be experienced by simply celebrating the steps it takes to get there, because it doesn't happen overnight. There's a tremendous amount of hard work that happens in order for us to reach our end destination. And I think we've said before, Miley Cyrus, it's the climb, it's not the end, whatever. We weren't going to sing it for us today, but I'm singing it for anyone today. But it was really cool to remind myself and to remind our BrainWise friends, celebrate the small things. Even if they seem small, they're probably large to some degree. But the joy that you can get out of celebrating those milestones that you've set for yourself along your journey is significant. And it will help tremendously shape the perspective that you're working in. So that's my BrainWise moment for the week. So thank you, Joey, for the reminder and always helping me to celebrate the milestones in our life.
And if I can tag on to that,
yeah,
in order to celebrate, you've first got to recognize, and the recognition that something happened or there was a milestone or whatever, that's just as important. And then what you do to celebrate is obviously equally important. Mm-hmm. But I think I want to emphasize, we ran a leadership program many years ago called The Journey is the Reward. And I think celebrating the journey as well as the milestones along the journey, really important. And some people, not everybody, some people love the ritual of celebrating. Mm-hmm. And for people who do, Friday night is a really good time that you've had the week, you've gotten things. celebrate what worked and what were your highs for the week, and
Mhm.
share them with the person that you're with, your spouse, your significant other. That putting your brain into a positive aspect for the weekend is not a bad approach.
No, I totally agree. And Phil, what was your brain wise or brain unwise moment from this past week?
I'm going to change it slightly. I'm going to call it a brain full week, because though
Okay.
it was a week of some wonderful highs and a low, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I got involved in a conversation about how organizations are going and going to have to go through AI transformations. And I think we can add a lot by bringing the aspects of the brain into it. I got involved in putting together a model around how people are going to be successful in those new AI based organizations. I got involved in a breakthrough on one of my organizations that I'm on the board of directors for, where they had developed I forget what they actually call it, a presence index. How do you measure someone's presence? So there was a lot of really inspiring, positive future movement forwards, whatever you want to call it, moments. And our brains love positive future. It gives our brains a hit of dopamine, and it feels good. So from that perspective, it was a brainful positive. I had something happen this week which caused me to lose significant trust. We'll talk about that in a little more depth at the moment, but that was the only downside. I got to meet
Yeah.
with the mayor of Oxford, who is a wonderful man, Panamanian, and he's trying to change that little town and move it forward. So I was able to help him. He's getting re-elected, hopefully in about 4 weeks' time. So, yeah, it's overall a great week. And I would just encourage going back to your celebrations. I would encourage people, our BrainWise friends out there, on a regular basis. What worked? What was positive? And what did you do to celebrate?
I love it. Yeah.
That's
Very
the
in,
end. That's the end.
that's all she wrote. We're doing a mini episode today. No, we're just teasing. Don't leave us. We are not quite complete yet. But no, I think it's all. I'm sad that there was a moment of frustration this week. Maybe there's something positive that comes out of that experience for you, Phil, but it inspired the content or the message that we're going to be talking about today. But I just think there's so many good things that have happened that can be easy to dwell on. And I find myself sometimes doing this, the unfortunate things that happen. But then how can you, and I think that's another fun spin on this is, how can you take those moments that maybe did cause you a bit more of stress or breaking trust or were more negative, and to some degree reverse engineer them into something that is positive, maybe not in that experience, but in the future, which I think is what we're going to be doing today. Is when we talk about, when our topic for today is around the kind of the neuroscience or the brain science around trust. And it might be a couple of episodes because we can go really in depth into a lot of areas on trust. And we're going to talk about it from a behavioral perspective. But I think that's the reverse engineered positive part, maybe. I might be somewhat presumptive in that, but that from what happened that was unfortunate in your week to now how we're using it in a positive way to help other people. So, Phil, you want to talk a little bit about where that came from, what details you're willing to share on what happened, and then we can use that to propel us into the rest of our conversation around the brain science of trust.
Yeah, and I won't go into a lot of details to save the innocent and the not so innocent, me being probably on the not so innocent side of things. But someone who was relatively close to me did something behind my back, which what he did, no problem with whatsoever. But it was one of those things that would have been nice to have heard from him directly rather than through a third party. And so I was driving back from learning about this, and I was contemplating as I was driving along, and I was thinking that had shattered my trust. And whereas the trust level was probably 9.5 out of 10, it's now down at a 3. And so that was I don't want to say brain unwise moment. The wise part of it was I recognized what was going on and said, we need to do something about it. And so I'm putting in motion what to do about it. And for those people who might be curious, there's a structured conversation that you can have about when trust is lost. Happy to share that, maybe even later today or in the next episode.
First, before I talk about the question, I want to acknowledge the experience that you had, because I think one of the things that I always talk about is acknowledge what we've gone through and give ourselves a moment to, whether it's grieving it or whether it's to just being able to save space for what we've experienced. So I want to acknowledge that. And I'm sorry that you had to experience the breaking of trust with someone who was really close to you. I can't imagine the feelings that came out of that experience and kind of the emotional journey that you were on. I just want to make sure we acknowledge that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And for our BrainWise listeners, so if you step back from that, unpack it, one of the things that helps our brains is if you can actually label what's going on, not dwell on it, but just say, hey, I feel, fill in the blank. In my case, I felt violated. And then I'm not sure we know why, but the fact of labeling things seems to be part of a step of saying, oh, okay, I got it. As a little micro tool, if you like, in being able to label what's going on. It helps.
It does. And I think it's great because, and it actually applies to a little bit around empathy. And if we as individuals can help knowing what you've experienced this week, it's easy for people to just skip over it and move on and not leave a little bit of space for it to happen. Because when you can acknowledge through demonstrating empathy, we shared our empathetic statement, which is, I understand that blank has you feeling blank. That's putting a label on it, as you were just describing it from the perspective of what I might be seeing from my vantage point, and us being able to, step back and acknowledge it becomes really important. And so we could have skipped over it, but I didn't want to because it's absolutely critical that we acknowledge it, which it's actually inspired to some degree the context of the conversation that we want to talk about today, which we've shared is around the neuroscience or the brain science of trust. So why is trust so foundational for the brain, and what happens when we feel it?
Let's go back to actually what happens when you meet a stranger.
Mm-hmm.
If you are out on the street and you meet a stranger, if you don't have some third-party connection with an individual, your brain starts to engage what we call the faux circuitry. I think we talked about. And then once you find something in common with somebody, then you click over to, I'll call it the friend circuitry. So it actually changes. And so I think part of what happens is as you find something in common with somebody, you start to build up the trust. As you start to get to know them, and I'll jump straight ahead here. And what we are looking for is basically 4 things. 3 positive, 1 negative. We're looking for, do they have credibility? Do they have reliability? Mm-hmm. And are they, and the word that's used is intimacy, are they vulnerable to being open? And those are, as you look at, if you increase your credibility, you increase your reliability, and you increase your vulnerability, then trust goes up. That's the positive aspects. The negative aspect is if you spend a lot of time talking about yourself. And the more people turn the conversation back to, oh, let me talk about me, then trust starts to go down. Yeah. And again, we'll throw this book on this book reference, but there's a guy, there's actually, I think there's 3 authors to the book, but the one I can remember is, I think, David Meister, called The Trusted Advisor. And that's where they came up with this algorithm or this equation. In the book, they turn around and add those 3 factors at the top together. Now, I'm a little bit of a nerd from time to time, and my algebra background says it's actually more efficient. It's slightly better to multiply them together. Because if any one of them is 0 and missing, you're not going to get trusted. Or if any one of those is small, you're not going to get trusted. Mm-hmm. So that's the overall. If I were writing on a blackboard, those are the old days, whiteboard or whatever we write on these days, trust index equals credibility multiplied by reliability multiplied by vulnerability all over and divided by self-orientation.
Hmm.
And so you can now structure and even give yourself a scale of 1 to 10 in each of those 4 areas. And you can start to actually come up with a sort of numeric index of trust.
Yeah.
So that's the big round way of looking at it.
So I have a question, and maybe what we do here is on this first topic where we talk about trust is we actually go into a little bit around the 3 on the top of the equation and talk about how do we build credibility with another person, because there's different types of credentialing, right? I mean, or credibility that one can carry into a conversation or relationship, and I think it's different based off of if I'm in a work context or if I'm in a relationship context. What is credibility? And then maybe talk about reliability, and then vulnerability we can talk about also, because I can give people tools on how do I myself, one, maybe measure against this particular area, and then 2, maybe how I can improve that area if I feel like I might be lower in that particular category. So how does
Yeah.
that sound?
Most of my comments are probably going to be oriented around the workspace,
Mm-hmm.
because that's, in my background, that's the most amount of time I've spent and where my attention has been.
And I'll add the relationship context, I think.
Cool. So first of all, do you have the ability to do the job, right? And you and I were on a phone call this morning with a colleague, and I particularly noticed a few things that she said, and one of them was in reference to a book I'm reading, and she asked the question, "What qualifies him to be an expert?"
Mm.
And I just happened to see the opening of the book, and it says, he's this, he's a fellow of All Souls, he's an associate fellow of the Templeton Oxford, a fellow of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, consultant emeritus to a hospital, does neuroimaging at Johns University. And at the end of it, you go, yeah, he's probably credible in that. So do you have the ability to do the job is one significant. The other thing is that are they believable, authentic, and sincere? That's on you, because if somebody doesn't come across as authentic and sincere, doesn't matter what their credibility and what they've got the credentials to do. I guess there's a difference between credibility and credentials. They may have the credentials to do the job, but do you believe them when they're telling you what to do? Do they always act in integrity? And that's part of what happened to me this week is I felt like that person was out of integrity. It would have been better had they said to me face to face, this is what I'm doing. And again, it's not what was done, it was the process behind it.
Yeah.
Do they always meet expectations? They are explicit or implicit. Yes, I'm going to be there at 8:00 Friday morning. This is a real live example of today. I'm going to be there at 8:00 Friday morning, and no show.
Mm.
That's going to reduce your credibility. Do they role model ethical principles? Can you actually look to them and go, yeah, that's a person that is credible in my eyes. I trust them.
Mm.
Finally, a couple of things. One is, do they have favorites? Because if they have favorites, then am I a favorite or am I on the outside?
Mm-hmm.
And then this last one I'm going to comment is more about in a sales role. Do you sell your product or do you try and downplay the competition? So a big package of stuff all boils into credibility.
And I think if we think about that, because there are a lot of things you were just talking about, credibility from a work or professional context really do apply to a personal or relational context. It's just in a maybe a slightly different way. Like you're talking about ethics and are they an ethically sound person? Well, in relationships, you're also going to be looking for, does this person align with my ethical considerations, with the values that I have? Do I see them as making moral and sound decisions, not just romantic, but friendships too, right? Or even relationships in the professional context, but relationships in general, in this case, that's going to be a consideration. I think another one is, do you say what you mean, or are you simply, and you talked about that early on in your definition of credibility, it's the same thing in relationships is, if I say something, do I actually mean it? Do the actions that I demonstrate match what I'm saying? Because when there becomes dissonance between what I say out loud versus what I physically then go do, there becomes for people, it can create a space where, can I trust them? Because typically the first thing that we experience from someone is what they tell us. Then we see their actions play out and we're looking for the two to align. And it probably goes back to something where we're creating some sort of pattern for that person in our brain, or schema as we've called it. We're creating that for someone. And now we're looking for them to match up based off what they're telling me they're about versus now how they're actually showing up in real life.
And I think we have talked about in a previous episode about consistency. The brain loves consistency, both consistency in our own experiences and what we do, and consistency from other people. So probably, and until this very moment, I probably would now add in on credibility would be consistency.
Totally.
And in fact, I'm going to make a note of that right now. Oh, we've got it. We're recording it. So
we are.
Yes, consistency. And, what's fascinating about consistency is because you want it, but you also want people to explore and be curious and therefore maybe do things different. That's a real balance between consistency and curiosity.
So, I think consistency relationally anyways probably shows up more in how someone treats me, right? Or how do they show up for me? There's going to be some there, I would imagine, where we might want them to, in different contexts, do something different as they learn about us. But we don't want them to become so different in terms of how they interact with me as an individual. That's probably going to create some form of threat. So there's a lot of consistency that's expected in the relationships. I need this consistent empathy from this person, or I need consistency in them showing up on time, or whatever it is. There's going to be that expectation that we've created, and maybe curiosity shows up in other ways in terms of what kind of date nights we go on. I consistently want to go on a date night with my spouse or with my significant other, but I don't always want to just go to a movie and dinner either. I want to do something different. Not that I'm speaking from personal experience. I'm not. It's all fictitious at this point because we do a ton of things that are all out of the box. But I think that's based on what you were describing, how from a relational context, it can certainly show up. And I think, Phil, one of the things that we might, or our BrainWise friends might do in this scenario is look at, there's a space where you're experiencing a lack of trust for someone as you're hearing about credibility, reliability, vulnerability. Where is it that you might be experiencing it? And then how do you repair, which will be probably a topic for another conversation, another podcast. But then two, for myself or yourself as an individual, how am I showing up in this particular area of credibility? And is there something that I need to do differently in order to earn more significant trust, or whatever it might be along that journey?
Yeah. And so one of the learnings for me was, as I thought through what my response is going to be, is it says role model ethical principles. So the learning for me at about 7:00 last night was, hey, whatever response I have, to role model a good way of handling a difficulty like this. Yeah. So, and that's always a good idea, to think, leave some space, let the brain calm down a little bit. And so that's probably a face-to-face conversation early next week.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, but you've wanted to talk reliability?
Yeah, and in fact, what occurred to me as we were talking is the second part is reliability, part of which is also consistency. Mm-hmm. Consistency will show up in both in terms of credibility and reliability. And predictability. That's all part of reliability. Do you say what you're going to do? Do you have personal strength? There was a book written many years ago called The Courage of Your Convictions, which is basically what you were talking about. Say what you're going to do and do what you're going to say. No, that's wrong, isn't it? There's a mixed metaphor in there somewhere, I know.
Yeah.
Are people able to act independently? So, when you get that person that comes through and says, well, would you do this? I don't know. I have to check with my fill in the blank. I have to check with my boss. I have to check. Knowing your own, it's fine to have that need to check, but knowing what those boundaries are and that they are transparent boundaries. I can make decisions about this. If you ask me to lower the price, then probably not. If you ask me to increase the delivery date, then I can do something about it. from a reliability perspective, does that individual look at things from all sides? Are they only presenting their own viewpoint, or are they able to present multiple viewpoints and say, oh, hey, if I were in this position, I'd probably look at it this way. If I was in this position, I'd look at it this way. So you're showing and demonstrating openness and transparency. And so that all comes down to reliability. Are you professionally courageous? Are you willing to take a stand? I'll guarantee that this will actually work in this situation. Or, no, I cannot guarantee. You're going to try and use this product for something it wasn't designed for, and therefore I'm not going to stand behind it. And we've just had a kitchen reinstalled, and some of the quality of some of the doors wasn't what it should have been. And so the manufacturer's rep was called in, and he looked at it and went, "You're right. We're going to replace not just those that we can see. We're going to replace every door." Hey, that's the rep having courage.
Right.
And reliability is also, are you willing to take a certain level of risk? Now, taking too much risk would show that maybe you're unreliable, but taking a calculated risk and saying, hey, yes, we are going to do this. Yes, I am going to risk putting this out there because I've looked at this, I've looked at this, I've looked at this, and that risk is worth taking. Right. Those are, again, these big words like reliability. You can double click on them and identify some greater granularity.
And I think as we were talking about that just now, there's two parts from a relationship context that I want to just dig into a little bit, and now the second one, of course, is going to escape me. But the first one was around expectations. And I think in relationships, we have expectations of how we want our partner to show up. But the question is, have we ever expressed them? Have we ever asked for them? Have we ever communicated, this is what I expect? And then realizing people may not always be able to meet our expectations. And so is it the expectation that's not being met and it's something that should be met? Or is it that the expectation we have is really going to be unrealistic for anyone to meet? Therefore, we have to work on ourselves. So I think around expectations is really important because the reverse is also true. Your partner, your friend, whatever, your spouse has expectations of how they want you to show up. And the question is, the first one is, have they ever expressed them? Have you expressed your expectations and had that discussion? Then two, when you know them and it's something you can do, how then consistent are you or reliable are you in being able to meet them?
Yeah.
Which I think is really interesting.
I'm excited about this because it also dovetails in with something that a lot of people have trouble with, and that's saying no. And I can't tell you how many people I've coached who find it very difficult to say no. In fact, a person that I'm about to start coaching, the biggest amount of feedback is she takes on too much. And when I first started talking to her, it was the fact that she doesn't, in her background, it was not possible to say no. She's now getting in trouble because she's taking on too much. And I think that there's a different concept between saying no and assuming it's the end of the discussion.
Right.
And saying no, and that's the first step in a negotiation process. And I think if you reframe it into, it's my first step into the next phase of the discussion, rather than it's the end.
Yeah.
No, I cannot do this, but let me tell you what I can do, and then you make an offer. And I think that helps. I've found that's helped so many people go, oh, you mean I can actually do a counter offer?
And I think in relationships, it's really important to have conversation around that and set an expectation that it's okay for us to do that by saying, no, I can't do that right now. I can do it at this point, or I can do it in this way. Because I think there are some people on the spectrum that go, I can't say no because I don't want to disappoint my spouse or my friend or my whatever. Then there's people on the other side that just say no all the time, right? And they're not going, and then there's needs that are going unmet. And so there has to be a different type of conversation that happens in our ability to say no, because it is okay to do it. I think it's having a conversation on the front end, again, around expectations and laying it out. And then it's not always going to be a hard no, but it's more of, okay, here's how we can get to the same end goal, just maybe not in the same way one thought it was going to happen, which is totally okay. Because if you think about it, it's really the goal that we're trying to get to. As long as it gets accomplished, what difference if we go in a direct path or we go in a zigzag path? It doesn't really matter. And I think the other thing that you had mentioned around reliability, Phil, that I want to talk about that's really important for relationships is around, is the person able to demonstrate, or am I able to demonstrate the capacity for looking at both sides of the context or both sides of the equation? My side, your side, the other person's side. Or am I specifically only focused on my perspective, on my experience? Because when couples have arguments, a lot of times, yes, we want to get to the root of what we're actually trying to solve. But the other reality is we have to be able to demonstrate. And a lot of times we want it to be done without it being asked. I don't want to ask my spouse to see my point of view. I will, but I want them to just do it because they care about me. We all have this underlying expectation, I think, for the most part, that we want that. And so how do we, one, express it in a polite way, a way that's constructive, and then two, do a self-assessment of ourselves. Am I really seeing all sides of this equation or all sides of this conversation, or am I positioning my own perspective as most important and my own feelings? And when we all know when the amygdala takes over and we get all emotional or things start to really flood, is what they call it from a psychological perspective, we're flooding. It's very difficult for us to be able to have that rational part take over, which we've given strategies for in the past. But I think it's really important to take a step back and understand for yourself, how am I showing up in those discussions? Am I seeing it from all perspectives? And does my partner see that I see it from all perspectives?
Yeah. And I think I'm sure if we were to play that back again, it would demonstrate one of the things that I think is important. We talk about all these things as though they're separate, but no, they're not. It's like a big bowl of spaghetti. They're all intertwined with one another. And as soon as you start talking about one thing, that's why I think if we use I think the term in psychology is a reductive process. If we use a reductive process and we end up just talking about this, then this in and of itself is probably not going to get you anywhere. You need to look at the whole, this interacts with this and this interacts with this. So unpacking it, as we do in these episodes, is useful in terms of, hey, understanding that piece. But they all intertwine and you've got to take them all into account almost simultaneously.
Totally. Because they're all happening in our brains at the same time. Quite often, things are going on in rapid fashion. And so we have to be able to really understand the full context of, which is where growth comes in. We just talked about neuroplasticity and how we can continue to grow and to change. And that's what these conversations are about, is helping us to add new understanding to what we already understand today versus, oh, I have this new piece, I'm going to throw all the rest of this away. It's how do you put it all together as a part of the full equation?
And be true to yourself in doing so. There's nothing wrong with changing. If you've got some core things about yourself that you believe that they've been useful to you in the past and they're going to be useful in the future, then that's go for it.
Yeah, keep those and add on the new ones as you go along your life journey. Which I think, Phil, if we look at the third part that we talked about on the top of the equation, we had credibility, which we've talked about, reliability, which we just talked about. The third part is around vulnerability. So let's talk a little bit about that and how that plays into trust.
Lots about it. And for many people, it's one of the biggest issues. So I'm just going to throw out a few words and see how they resonate with you. And one is open. Open. It's a high degree of trust is around, they're not hiding things. Transparent, very similar. Let me know what's going on. Fair. And we've talked about fairness in the past. And for some people, this guy included, fairness is a major driver of the brain. Because if things are not fair, we think we may not survive. Compassion, really important. In fact, one of the things that's the good news about compassion is it's useful in both directions. Compassion actually makes the other person feel good, and actually being compassionate makes the deliverer feel good. And benevolent. It doesn't mean to say you're going to give away all your money, but giving away of time, thinking about the community, thinking about all the stakeholders and what's best for everybody. I'll talk a little bit again about, I don't want to make this too much about me, but this last week, I decided to get re-engaged with one of the enterprises that I'm involved with, because it's not the best thing for me, but it's probably the best thing for the enterprise. Benevolence, self-awareness. We talk about all these things, but if you're lacking self-awareness, it's probably difficult to recognize the fact that you just achieved a milestone. So, there's almost some layering going on here. There's a few collaboration and cooperation with all easy for me to say. Collaboration and cooperation with all stakeholders. There's a lot of us will collaborate and cooperate with our in-group, but then I'm not going to engage HR in this because they're useless. And we don't need finance involved in this one, or whatever it may be. Or engineers, you can never talk to them straight, but they're all stakeholders. And so in collaboration with everybody. And the reverse of that is show appreciation to everybody. These are all part of humor. You and I just don't have any. So
not at all. We're dry.
How on earth can we talk about humor? But humor, and it's fine until it's at somebody else's expense. And that's where a lot of the, quote, jokes that are around in the political arena are at somebody else's expense, in which case they're not appropriate. A joke which is objective and not at somebody else's expense, great, I'm all for it. But if you're belittling somebody by doing the joke, that's at their expense, and that's not appropriate. I don't think it's appropriate anywhere.
No. And it breaks trust, quite honestly.
Again, all of these things can either add to trust or break trust. Have clear and obvious values, and be willing to state, hey, this is important to me. This is a value I hold.
Right.
And finally, I'd say the willingness to share personal stories, not just all the things that you did and you worked. And we were talking earlier on about a person who stood up and was braggadocious. And yeah, by all means, share them, but not too many of them. And share the failures as well.
Right.
If you know that I screwed up on doing this, that, and the other, and by the way, I thought I made a mistake once, but I was wrong.
Yeah. That's humor. And then also, is that getting a little bit stepping away from self, or stepping into self-orientation, I think?
Who knows?
Right. Yeah.
Maybe it's a little self-awareness in there as well.
Totally. And something that is interesting is, I think the other one that applies, we just talked about those probably more from a work context, but from a personal context, is also share how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be stereotypical, but typically women have an easier time, I will say, expressing them and identifying them, at least in the Western world for them. Maybe it's all across, I'm not sure, but I'm not stereotyping at all. It's just that traditionally that is how it's gone. And then men typically struggle, at least in their formative years, and being able to express that. And maybe it's the opposite for the BrainWise friend that's listening. I'm not sure, but I would just challenge us to think about how, especially from a friendship perspective, a relationship, or even to some degree where appropriate in the work context, sharing how you feel about something creates relatability. It creates a way for people to demonstrate compassion, to demonstrate empathy. And especially in relationships, it's what creates connection, in my experience. And expressing a feeling, people can often mask that as, oh, I'm going to criticize you for whatever it is that you did. That's not actually the feeling. The feeling is, I felt hurt, or I felt betrayed, or I felt mistrusted, or I felt disrespected, or I felt sad, or whatever. The emotion that you felt as a result of the action is the vulnerability part. It's easy for any of us to sit here and say, Phil, you really pissed me off, or you really did, when you did this, I don't like it when you do that. And then they start going into, that's me being vulnerable, but it really isn't. It's, if you start that conversation by saying, I was really hurt when this happened, and I just need you to know how it made me feel. That's a totally different context than saying, Phil, that what you just did, I don't like that.
Yeah. And let's focus on that for a little bit, because I think it's an important aspect. And for many people, you say, how did that make you feel? And they say, oh, good. Good is not a feeling. Happy is a feeling. It's actually, happy is almost an interpretation of a feeling.
Right.
But feeling is, you said, it's an emotion. It's a bodily thing that I felt anxious is a really good example. I felt breathless.
Sad.
Any of those, sad, all of those things. But so when we are responding to those questions, just to be really clear and again, self-aware of what am I actually feeling?
Right.
Heads up, a warning. Sometimes that can bring up when we suddenly find we are accessing a feeling inside us that we haven't been used to accessing. That can sometimes, again, feel strange. And again, a lot of people will then try and tamp that down because it's a bodily feeling. We're not used to it. And, oh, I don't like it. I'm going to avoid that, at least for the time being. Challenge. That might be one of the reflection points I've actually got a couple of reflection points for the end of this one.
I do too. I don't have a list this time. I'm unprepared with the 100 reflection questions today. I won't have 100, but I should because that's the number behind my head, Phil.
There we go. Yeah.
When you were talking about the emotion and being able to identify it, the other part it does is it demonstrates that especially in relationships, when you can truly do the work, one, you need to allow yourself to feel emotions. You need to allow yourself to feel them because it helps you to create relatability with other people in your future. Avoiding them just ultimately, it's like you're boxing all of these things in and over time, it's going to explode. I know in my personal life, I had several people that, from the past that they did not know how to express their emotion. And so they would bottle it up. And then eventually there'd be this huge explosion and they demonstrated as anger. It's because there were all these small things that happened that they didn't express, that they didn't probably didn't identify it first or recognize it was happening and then express it. And the act of expression allows you to let it go for the most part, or at least to pin it, like we were talking about with empathy. So we all have to begin that self-discovery process. And then what it does in relationships when we're able to begin to express it, I believe it's as the relationship connection deepens, it will gain a deeper level of trust because you're now saying, I trust you with the most vulnerable, raw part of who I am. Whether it's good, bad, indifferent is irrelevant at this point, and you're demonstrating that to the other person. Now, the other person that's receiving it, we have a significant responsibility with what do we now do with that information in order to continue keeping the door of connection open, demonstrating empathy. Don't insert yourself into it because at that moment, it's not about you, it's about them. And sometimes the best thing you can do, we learned this from Susan Larson Kidd, is to just be there. You may not even need to say anything at all, right? You might just demonstrate empathy. I understand that has you feeling blank. And then sit there and support them while they go through it. And then whatever it is to move forward post that experience. So I just wanted to underscore that part, Phil, because I think it's really important for us as all of us as individuals. We sometimes will shy away from wanting to identify or express them, but it's really critical that we do. It's also critical. It's like walking on a fine line or on a tightrope. We don't want to swim so far down in the emotion that we're unable to get out as individuals. So you want to express it, identify it, pin it, and then be able to move forward.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I want to say right now starts to tie together some of what we've talked about in the past and I'm not saying put an envelope around it or anything, but we've talked a little bit about worldview or mental models, whatever you want to call them. There's a mental model when you initiate a conversation. Who has responsibility for the success of that conversation or that dialogue? Some people just turn around and say they need to understand it because if they don't get it, then it's their problem. And I would actually posit the fact that no, a more useful mental model is that if you initiate a conversation or a dialogue, you have responsibility for its success.
Yes, 100%.
And so how will you know it's been successful? Checking in at the very end.
Right.
And listening, advocating a position, questioning, all those things are part of the dialogue, which we'll spend a lot more time on one of these days. But the mental model of am I going to be responsible to ensuring that what I'm trying to get across is actually the way it actually is interpreted. There's another one which is related right behind that is, and I discovered this the other day actually watching somebody, and it was clear they weren't listening. Mm. And when I started to unpack what was going on, it became very clear that the mental model this person had, that if I listen, it means I'm agreeing. And that's an interesting concept. As facilitators, we know very often we're going to have to listen, and we are absolutely not agreeing.
Right.
But we're in the process of listening, and that's where we have to be. Mm-hmm. But there's mental models out there that some people have that I'm not going to listen to you because therefore, if I listen to you, you're going to assume I agree. That's not what's going on. When we talk about mental models, it's not just the big mental models that are impacting decisions minute by minute. It's those smaller moment by moment ones.
For sure, because there's probably more of them, and they certainly impact a wide degree of our reality. So I think we've talked a lot today about trust, specifically around there's the three components. We said credibility, reliability, vulnerability, and then it's divided by self-orientation. So if we can, let's talk a little bit, Phil, about what that means or from a self-orientation perspective, because then I think we'll come back next week with a part 2, which is when trust is broken, how do we rebuild it?
Yeah. So self-orientation is relatively obvious, but I'll throw out, again, a series of bullet points. One is, do we tend to think about self-reward rather than and what I'm going to get out of it, rather than what the other person's going to get out of it? There is, do I tend to have a self-reward model that, what am I going to get out of this? Or do I have a more other reward? What are you or other people or others going to get out of it? Self-orientation tends to be short-term personal gain rather than long-term overall value for a wider group of people. This is one that you will have seen again and again, and that is specifically bad leaders taking personal credit for achievement of a team rather than giving the team credit. And that's one of the ways it manifests itself more frequently. People see right through it, and it decreases trust almost instantly.
Yeah.
When you're talking, do you tend to use I orientation or we orientation? And again, that's the non-conscious speaking. Hey, it's all about me. When people jump immediately to advocating a position rather than inquiring what's going on. I forget where it was, but this morning when we were talking, I made a statement and someone said, what do you mean by that? That's an inquiry, and it's going to, it's not all about them jumping in and saying an assumption about what they thought I meant. So are you overly focused on personal stories and experiences? And this is where it's a balance. We talk about intimacy, where you want people to be vulnerable enough to share those stories. But if you're overly focused on it, it can become very self-orienting.
Right.
And a tip there is ask your audience. It's now an appropriate time for me to share a personal story.
I think on that really quickly, Phil, when we talk about sharing personal stories or being vulnerable, it's also just equally as much when someone else is demonstrating it, how do we then show up in that moment? Because if we show up if you're expressing something and being vulnerable to me and I make it all about me, and I start making references to what I've experienced or what I've done or how you can change it based off what I believe, whatever, rather than just acknowledging that it exists and acknowledging that you feel that way, that changes someone's perspective on self-orientation of the other person too.
Yeah. Yeah. And just a couple more bullet points. One is constant interruption. Basically, it happens and we all do it. But if it's constant and repetitive, that can reduce trust. Filling in the blank. When someone is speaking and they take a breath, we add on what we think they're about to say. 4 times out of 5, we get it wrong. But it's all about, again, self-orientation as opposed to giving them the space to finish their thought. Always tending to turn the conversation back to, oh, I remember an occasion when I did the following. And what I call excuse and justification orientation. Yeah, I know I did that, but, and you fill in.
Right.
And the old story, everything before the but gets forgotten, everything after your but.
Totally. Yeah, never apologize with a but at the end of it. Or demonstrate empathy with a but at the end of it, because everything else becomes absolutely irrelevant as a part of the conversation.
Or even a because. Right. I'm sorry, but I did this because blah, 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 blah.
Or however, because we call them fancy butts, or a butt in a tuxedo.
That's an image I will go with for the weekend, a butt in a tuxedo.
I want you to draw it out and we'll show it on our next episode. Too funny. But those transitional words, rather than allowing the empathy or the apology to land appropriately, which we should talk someday about how do you apologize appropriately, because I think there's a variety of ways people attempt to apologize, none which are probably intentionally wrong, but there is a way to make it so that you are coming across in a more authentic way. But you don't, by adding in those transitional words, you then just negate everything that you just talked about. You just basically said, it's not important that I apologize. What's more important is my perspective.
Yeah, again. And so all of those are self-orientation. And if anybody looks at the algebra of the equation that we talked about, there's the 3 things on the top that multiply together. And if any of them is small, then for those of you who remember your algebra training, the whole product, you multiply things together, it's called a product. The whole product becomes small. The bigger the self-orientation, the greater it's going to divide into that, and your trust index goes down.
Which is really interesting, I think, and leads to a great opportunity for us to talk about our reflection, because what immediately came to me was, when you think about the credibility, reliability, vulnerability, and self-orientation, if we start by looking at because knowing that the self-orientation can have such a positive or negative impact on the overall equation or the product of the equation, maybe that's where we all should start at some point, is identifying, how am I showing up? And if it's not a challenge for you, then okay, then you move into something else. Where is it that self-orientation is coming in, and am I doing it in a way that's balanced for other people? And if you're unsure, ask someone you trust and say, how do I show up in conversation in our relationship? Do I show up as more intentional for other people, or more intentional for myself? I think that's one way. And then the other way is to look at the self-orientation as a starting point, and then begin to look at, where am I credible in my credibility score? Where am I in my reliability and vulnerability score? And based off what we've talked about today, identify which of those areas within each of the 3 categories that you can see the most improvement. So that would be how I would suggest, Phil, that from my perspective, people begin to reflect on the episode we've talked about today. But how would you like to summarize and or suggest reflection for our BrainWise friends?
So take all of those, the credibility, reliability, and vulnerability, and give yourself a score on a scale of 1 to 10. Where are you? And multiply them together, and then self-orientation, give yourself a score, and then divide one by the other, and you've got your index. Then what I would say is, what do I have to do? What one thing could I do that would actually make that index increase?
Hopefully our BrainWise friends have picked up some nuggets. I know I've learned some nuggets along the journey. And I think what we'll talk about in our next episode is just a continuation, is when trust is broken, how do we rebuild it? Thank you for tuning in to our episode of My BrainWise Coach on what is trust, or the neuroscience of trust. And stay tuned as we continue the conversation next week on how to rebuild trust when it's broken. And as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this episode with your friends and colleagues and relationships, so that they too can begin to learn how to decode their life from a BrainWise perspective. And as always, stay compassionate, stay curious, and stay brainwise. We'll talk to you next week.